Hi, it's Nate here from Teaching by Science. I wanted to make a presentation for people that explains some of the absolute basic terms and concepts from evidence-based reading instruction. Um, and I will say as a caveat, normally I don't give this type of information. Normally I focus on, analyzing research to suggest or see what we can say works best or what doesn't work. But I know that the average person doesn't want to look at research. So, well, I think it's important to consider research specifically. In this video, I'm just going to be going over terms and basic forms of instruction we can give in a classroom and what that looks like in best practice. So if you want to learn more about the research side of things, I recommend you check out my book, The Scientific Principles of Reading Instruction. So we're going to start off with just absolute basics. What is a phoneme and a grapheme? This is important to recognize because it takes consideration a lot of the types of teaching we do in evidence-based literacy instruction. So a phoneme is the smallest divisible unit of sound that can be identified in spoken speech. There are 26 letters in the English alphabet. However, there are 44 sounds. For example, T makes the T sound and TH makes the sound. A grapheme is the written representation of a phoneme. There are 250 graphemes in the English language. So a morpheme is the smallest unit of sound that contains meaning in a word. So morphemes include prefixes, root words, bases, and suffixes. A base has a meaning without a prefix or suffix. A root word is borrowed from other languages and has no meaning on its own. For example, boot is a base. Sen is the root word of senior and senator and means old. However, sen does not exist as a word in English on its own. According to the National Reading Panel, there are 5 pillars of literacy instruction. These are the forms of instruction that have the strongest evidence for their efficacy. These include phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. However, many argue that morphology should be added as the 6th pillar, myself included. So we're going to start with the most basic of those 5 pillars, and that is phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is the ability to identify and manipulate phonemes within spoken words. Phonemic awareness instruction is instruction that aims to improve the skill. Research shows that segmenting and blending drills done with letters produce the greatest impacts on reading and spelling, whereas manipulation and deletion drills done without letters produce the greatest impacts on phonemic awareness skills. Now, there seems to be some confusion about this term in specific, and I think sometimes people think that phonemic awareness is phonics without letters, and that the second we add letters, phonemic awareness becomes phonics. But that's not true. Phonics and phonemic awareness are completely distinct types of instruction, separate from their inclusion or exclusion of letters. Phonemic awareness is really just the ability to identify and manipulate sounds in speech. So blending and segmenting drills are the 2 types of phonemic awareness drills that we have the strongest evidence for. In a segmenting drill, the teacher reads the word and has the students identify the sounds. For example, the word super has 4 phonemes, s, So that word was segmented. In a blending drill, the teacher reads the segmented word out and asks the students to blend the sounds. For example, r, e, the, is reader. We can do either of these drills. Now, research shows that these types of drills are done best when we show letters. So we could do these drills, as they say, in the dark by having students close their eyes, or we could just write the segmented word on the board and ask the students to blend it. And you have to say it out loud to the students for it to still be phonemic awareness. But there's nothing stopping us from writing those letters. And likewise, we could write the word super on the board and have the students segment the sounds. You would still read the word because the focus in this activity is still on the oral component. But when we put the letters on the board, we are actually drawing the students' attention to the fact that there is a connection between those letters and those sounds, and the 2 things are not done in isolation. Phonics is the instruction of the correlation between phonemes and graphemes. So an example, G makes the G sound, and GE makes the J sound. Research shows that phonics works best when it's taught systematically. Systematic phonics is defined as instruction that includes explicit, uses a scope and sequence, and uses decodable text. Analytic phonics is a type of phonics that is sometimes referred to in opposition as synthetic phonics. There's not a ton of research on analytic phonics, and there's not a ton of research showing that it is always better, although the evidence we do have seems to suggest that synthetic phonics is better than analytic. In synthetic phonics, we tend to focus on the individual phonemes and the graphemes associated with them. So for example, CE makes the S sound, whereas analytic phonics tends to teach correspondences via word families. In example, root, boot, foot, loot, and hoot all have somewhat similar sounds and somewhat similar spelling patterns. Morphology instruction is the root of the English spelling system. This is why we have multiple grapheme for each phoneme. For example, PH, GH, F, and FF are all graphemes for the F sound. PH is typically used for science and Greek words. GH is used for words that end in the F sound, and FF is used to separate vowels to stop a vowel from saying its own name, i.e. the FF grapheme stops the I from making the IE sound in the word differentiate. Now, none of those are specifically morphemes, but morphemes help to explain why we have these types of patterns appearing in the first place. There's a large body of research showing that morphology instruction improves reading and spelling outcomes. However, there's no consensus on how best to teach morphology. That said, it makes logical sense to focus on prefixes and suffixes, as there are a limited number of prefixes and suffixes that are used on a regular basis. However, there are millions of root words and bases, so it's difficult to teach students root words and bases with any kind of consistency. An example, some suffixes could be es for plural, ed for past, ing for present, shun to indicate a noun, or er for more, or as a noun. Vocabulary refers to the meaning of words. There are millions of words in the English language, so teaching them all explicitly is impossible. That said, teaching academic language explicitly and pre-teaching difficult words and texts being read have both been shown to improve comprehension. There are 3 tiers of vocabulary that exist, according to McMillan in 2010. So tier 1 is everyday language. For example, ball, house, dog, cat. These are words that students will learn without any instruction. They'll learn them implicitly. Tier 2 words are literature words like infuriating, perplexing, mischievous. These are words that don't tend to be in everyday language, but tend to be used in complex literary text. So using read-alouds of these complex literary texts before the students have learned to read completely on their own can help to build the students' vocabulary of those tier 2 words. And tier 3 words are academic words, such as theoretical, plutocrat, or autocratic. These are words that students will require explicit instruction for. These words should be introduced during the relevant units, not necessarily in isolation. So if I'm teaching a unit on science, I teach the academic science words related to that unit. Fluency. Fluency refers to the ability to read quickly, accurately, and smoothly, also sometimes referred to as prosody. Students need ample time to practice reading out loud. Research shows that having students read the same text multiple times is the best strategy for improving fluency. I think this is a strange one for a lot of people because it's not a practice that's typically been done in traditional classrooms. But I like to think of it like playing like a piano. When students practice playing a song, they don't play it once and move on. When we teach fluency, it's the same idea. We should give multiple opportunities to practice reading the text. And I will say this comparison of playing or seeing reading instruction as like playing a piano is not my own analogy. That comes from Dr. Holly Lane. Now, comprehension is the most difficult one to discuss because it's the most complicated, because comprehension is not actually a skill in itself. It's actually a rather large collection of skills. And in order for students to be able to comprehend a text, they need to be able to do a lot of things, including decode/identify words, read fluently, know the meaning of words, self-regulate their behavior, have the relevant background knowledge, identify the important parts of the text, and construct a mental model. The last one being the final step in their comprehension journey. When we teach in comprehension, we should think about making sure that the students know the meaning of difficult words. So that's pre-teaching vocabulary, possess the relevant background knowledge. So that's pre-teaching the background knowledge that's going to be relevant to the text we ask them to read. Use a variety of texts, including nonfiction, narrative, and poetry. I think this is important because different types of texts are going to be comprehended in different ways. Narrative and poetry texts tend to have a lot of abstract and non-literal concepts in them, whereas nonfiction texts tend to be very background knowledge dependent. And we need both because we need to develop both types of skills for interpretation. But that said, there does seem to be some research to suggest that teaching nonfiction in general produces higher outcomes for improving reading comprehension. Specifically, Fillerman's 2022 meta-analysis showed that there was double the impact on reading comprehension when students were given nonfiction text to read for their fluency instruction. Lastly, we want to give students ample opportunities to answer different types of comprehension questions. Rather than, say, focusing our instruction in units on specific types of instruction, like, say, having a unit on summarizing and a unit on theme and a unit on inferencing. Rather, it makes more sense, in my opinion, to give students opportunities to practice all of these skills throughout the year. And it's also important to remember that much of what we view as comprehension is not actually comprehension itself, but rather communication. Because students' ability to write a summary is going to be just as big of a part about as comprehension as it is writing or speaking. It is in part a communication exercise and not just a comprehension exercise. So that is the end of my little video, and I have put the references on the screen for this short little talk. And I will actually share the slide below that in case anybody would like to use the slides for their own purposes. That's it for all, folks, and until next time.